Let's break down some general concepts of pull-ups and chin-ups. Good morning. Happy Tuesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. Okay, already a solid Tuesday. Let's dig into today's Q&A. I got a series of questions about chin-ups and pull-ups. Some are associated with what are the compensations that you're typically going to see. Some of it is associated with one gentleman was asking about elbow pain, and we'll kind of get to those. Today I want to sort of establish just a general framework of what we would expect to see and maybe some generalized compensatory strategies. First and foremost, we got to talk about range of motion and force production. So remember, we always talk about the concept of having this expanded external rotation field. So we need an ER field so we can access range of motion around us, and we superimpose internal rotation on top of that. So our internal rotation is a compressive strategy, it is force production, and it is usually resistance of gravity. And so if we limit that ER field, if we reduce the ER field through compensatory strategies or compression, we've immediately limited our potential to produce internal rotation and force production, and therefore also ranges of motion. So we want to keep that in mind as we go through talking about the chin-ups and pull-ups. So let's break the chin-up and pull-up into basically three segments. So we're going to talk about the initial position, we'll talk about mid-range, and then we'll talk about the finish. And so when we look at chin-ups and pull-ups, regardless of which one we're talking about, in this end range position of the hang, the shoulder is going to be biased towards internal rotation under almost every circumstance. We've got the medial border of the scapula that is compressed against the thorax. We have an orientation of the glenoid into ER. The humerus is going to be, therefore, in relative internal rotation. So under these circumstances, we need posterior lower expansion of the thorax, and we need an up pump handle because a deficit in either of these areas is going to lead towards a compensatory strategy. So for some of you, that compensatory strategy might be spreading your hands apart. So you're going to take a wider grip on the bar and, hey, my shoulder's more comfortable, because now what you've done is you've created an orientation into external rotation. You've now sort of expanded your ER field, if you will, and that allows you to produce internal rotation in that position with less compressive strategy. Now, as we move through this chin-up, we are essentially under load. So we are going to have an internal rotation bias throughout this entire thing. So this is just like a press, this is just like a bench press, this is just like a squat. We have a compressive strategy from start to finish, but we still need external rotation to allow us to access ranges of motion, and therefore that's what we superimpose our internal rotation upon. So when we're doing our pull, this is going to require that we maintain some measure of posterior expansion. If you lack the ability to expand the dorsal rostral area and therefore access some measure of ER, that means we've shrunk the ER field, and now we're going to need to figure out a way to superimpose this IR. So what we end up doing is we'll typically throw a compensatory strategy on top of that. So what you'll see is scapular retraction, which turns the glenoid outward into ER, or you're going to see traditional spinal extension under these circumstances, because that is the substitution for internal rotation at the shoulder when I don't have access to it at the shoulder. Now, let's not forget about our dynamic ISA. So to get the arms into the overhead position to even start the pull-up or chin-up effectively, we have to be able to reclose the infrasternal angle, because what we have to do is we have to create compression in the lower part of the thorax to promote the expansion upwards. So we're squeezing the bottom to push the volume of air into the upper part of the thorax, and this is what allows us to get the pump handle and the dorsal rostral expansion, so we have our ER available to us, and then we can produce our IR on top of it. As we move through the middle range of the chin-up, the demand of internal rotation is actually going to increase under these circumstances, but I still need to have dorsal rostral expansion, again, so I have some measure of external rotation that I can superimpose my IR on. Now, if I don't have that, what you're going to see is you're going to see that thorax compress even more. So you're going to see the space between the scapula get pushed forward. So you'll see this early scapular retraction. Again, this is turning the scapula into ER. So you'll see the arms moving outward away from midline to try to capture this externally rotated position. So again, I can superimpose my IR on. So a nice little comparison to this would be for those of you that have to squat with a really wide stance and the toe out. The reason that you do that is because you have to turn your hip sockets outward so you can have enough external rotation so you can produce force into the ground as you're squatting. Now let's go to the finish. So for me to finish a chin up, I'm going to need posterior lower expansion, which means that you better be able to control your infrasternal angle via abdominal activity, because what I have to do is I have to use my abdomen, my abdominal muscles, to push volume posteriorly into the posterior thorax to keep that expanded so I can access the end range position. If you don't expand that, there is no external rotation, range of motion available to you. Therefore, you cannot finish the exercise. So this is for those fine folks that are struggling to get their chest to the bar if they want to, or their chin over the bar if they want to, because what you can't do is you're not expanding that. So again, you're arching your back to produce your internal rotation. You compress to such a degree that you no longer have any range of motion available to you. So the compressive strategy is so great. You don't have ER, you don't have IR, motion stops. And the chin up is done. You'll see this in a lot of like the massive bodybuilders that go through this almost like just simple middle range excursions, because they just don't have any range of motion available to them. So, quick review. Common compensations for the lack of shoulder range of motion. You're going to try to find a way to orient into ER. So you're going to try to turn the scapula. So that's why you see the upper or the dorsal rostral compressive strategies to turn that glenoid outward. You're going to see traditional spinal extension as a substitution for the internal rotation. But keep in mind, the first thing you have to be able to do to effectively execute these pull-ups and chin-ups, I have to have enough expansion for my external rotation field that I can superimpose internal rotation on top of it. If you have any questions pertaining to the chin-up or anything else for that matter, go to askbillhartman@gmail.com, askbillhartman@gmail.com, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.